We live in a noisy world. Everyone is speaking. Few are listening. Everyone wants to be heard, but almost no one feels truly understood. And in that silence, in that misunderstanding, relationships break, teams collapse, and families drift apart. But if you want to transform your life, your leadership, your impact, seek first to understand, then to be understood. This is not just a habit. It's a human superpower. It's the bridge between conflict and connection. It's the key that unlocks trust. And it starts with one choice: listen first. When we talk about listening, really listening, it's not just a technique. It's not just something you do to appear kind or professional or patient. No, listening is far deeper than that. It's love in action. It's respect in real time. It's the moment you decide that another person's voice matters more than your response. And that decision, that moment, is where transformation begins. We live in a world where most people are screaming to be heard, but very few are truly listening. And I don't mean nodding politely while waiting to speak. I mean being fully present. I mean showing up for someone else's story with zero agenda. I mean letting go of your need to fix, to reply, to prove, and simply holding space for someone else to be human in front of you. That is one of the most powerful things you can ever give another person. Think of the last time you felt heard. Not just tolerated, not just acknowledged, but really heard. Someone looked at you, leaned in, didn't check their phone, didn't interrupt, didn't offer a quick solution or brush past your pain. They just listened. They listened like you mattered. Like your voice deserved airtime. Like you were the only person in the room. How did that feel? Didn't that moment shift something inside of you? Maybe it wasn't even about what they said. Maybe they didn't say much at all. But what they gave you was presence. And presence is powerful. It heals. It uplifts. It affirms our humanity. And that's what listening, real listening, is all about. I once met a senior executive who was known for turning around toxic work cultures. His secret wasn't better policies or stricter accountability systems. It was a yellow legal pad. Every Monday, he would sit with different team members for 20 minutes, write their name at the top of the page, and say, "Tell me what's really going on." And then he would shut up. He wouldn't offer solutions. He wouldn't defend leadership decisions. He would just listen. And he took notes. Not so he could later weaponize the information, but so he could follow up. And when his team saw that someone cared enough to take notes, to follow up, to remember the names of their kids, their projects, their frustrations, they started showing up differently. They gave more because they were seen. They committed more deeply because they were heard. That's not a strategy. That's love in action. Listening isn't passive. It's not something you do when you're too tired to speak. It's active. It's intentional. And it requires energy. That's why so few people do it well. Because it costs you something. It costs your ego. It costs your control. It costs your comfort. But what it gives back is immeasurable. It gives you trust. It gives you influence. It gives you connection. And there is nothing more powerful in leadership, in parenting, in marriage, or in friendship than the ability to connect. People don't follow the smartest person in the room. They follow the person who listens to them. People don't stay in jobs because of perks. They stay because someone listens to them. People don't fall in love with the best looking partner. They fall in love with the one who listens with their heart. You want to raise confident kids. Listen to them without rushing them. You want to lead with integrity. Listen before you decide. You want to resolve conflict. Listen without defending. You want to change your life. Start by changing the way you listen. Because when you seek first to understand, you will start seeing things that were always there, but you were too busy, too reactive, or too self-absorbed to notice. You'll hear the pain behind the anger. You'll hear the fear behind the resistance. You'll hear the longing behind the silence. And suddenly, what once looked like a problem becomes a person. What once felt like opposition becomes opportunity. That's the miracle of real listening. So I challenge you this week, make one person feel truly heard. not with your opinions, not with your suggestions, but with your presence. Put the phone down, close the laptop, look them in the eye. Say, I'm here. Tell me what's on your mind. And then listen, not with your ears, but with your heart. Do that, and I promise you won't just change a conversation. You'll change a life, maybe even your own. Most of us believe we're good listeners, but the truth is we often listen to reply, not to understand. It's almost instinctual. While someone is speaking, our minds are already forming counterpoints, crafting advice, or jumping to conclusions. We hear key words, we assume we know where they're going, and we get ready to pounce with our brilliant response. But that's not listening. That's reloading. That's waiting your turn. And there's a massive difference between being quiet and actually being present. Listening to respond keeps communication shallow, surface level, and often defensive. But listening to understand, that's where transformation happens. Imagine someone opening up to you about something vulnerable, something real. Maybe they're sharing a fear, a mistake, or a dream. And instead of trying to fix it or relate to it or top it with your own story, you pause. You lean in. You give them the space to fully express what's inside without interruption. You reflect their words. You ask thoughtful questions. You're not in a rush to be right. You're curious. You're not trying to impress. You're trying to understand. That kind of listening is rare. And that kind of listening is unforgettable. Because it tells the other person, you matter more than my opinion right now. I see you. I'm with you. I once met a couple who had been married for over 30 years. I asked them their secret, and the wife said, "He doesn't try to solve me." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but then she continued. "When I'm upset, he doesn't jump into advice mode. He doesn't tell me to calm down or remind me that I've survived worse. He just listens. He asks questions. He lets me feel what I'm feeling. And that makes me feel safe." That phrase stuck with me. He doesn't try to solve me. You see, when we listen only to respond, we're trying to manage or control the moment. We're uncomfortable with silence. We want to be helpful or correct or efficient. But most of the time, people don't want to be fixed. They want to be understood. Now contrast that with a common conversation many of us have had. Someone says, "I'm really struggling at work." And before they even finish, we jump in with, "Oh yeah, you should try working for my boss. Let me tell you what happened last week." Suddenly, the original speaker has disappeared. Their vulnerability has been hijacked. Their moment of sharing turned into a one-up story. And even if we didn't mean to, we've made it about us. We all do this. And often, we do it because we care. We want to relate, to connect, to offer comfort. But sometimes the greatest comfort is simply being quiet, letting someone get all the way through their thoughts without having to fight for airtime. A powerful example of this came from a teacher I know who works with troubled teens. He said he used to try and motivate them with pep talks. "You've got to want more for your life," he'd say. "You're better than this." But he noticed the kids would shut down. Then he tried something different. He stopped talking. He started listening. One day, a student said, "Nobody in my life waits to hear me. You're the first." That line hit like a lightning bolt. Nobody waits to hear me. That's what's at stake here. When we interrupt, when we rush to fix, when we assume, we rob people of their right to be fully expressed. And often that's all they've been longing for. So how do we change that? We slow down. We listen with intention. We resist the urge to jump in. And when the time comes to speak, we make sure it's not to defend or persuade, but to reflect what we've heard. We say things like, "It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed." Or, "That must have been really frustrating." These phrases don't end the conversation. They deepen it. They say, "I didn't just hear the words. You. So I invite you to practice this. In your next conversation, pay attention to your instinct to reply. Notice when your brain wants to jump ahead. And instead of speaking, breathe. Look into their eyes. Ask, 'Can you tell me more about that?' Let the silence be a container, not a void. Because in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. People open up, truth surfaces, healing begins, and trust grows. Listen not to reply, but to understand. Do that consistently, and you will change the way people experience you. You'll become someone who doesn't just talk, but someone who connects, someone who leads with empathy, someone who transforms relationships, one conversation at a time. Empathy is the invisible thread that binds human connection. It is the ability to step into another person's world, to feel with them, not just for them. It is the bridge between isolation and intimacy, between conflict and compassion. Empathy is not pity. It is not sympathy. It is not agreeing or condoning. It is understanding, deep, honest, and courageous understanding. And in a world full of noise and judgment, empathy is a revolutionary act. When we listen with empathy, we give others the most sacred gift, the permission to be fully human in our presence. We often think we're being empathetic when we say, "I know how you feel." But unless we've truly lived their experience, that phrase can be dismissive. True empathy sounds more like, "I can't imagine exactly how that feels, but I'm here to try and understand." It is patient. It is humble. And it requires us to step outside of our own perspective, to lay down our assumptions, and to enter into someone else's emotional world. Not with answers, but with openness. I remember meeting a young manager who was struggling with one of her team members. A man who was constantly late, unmotivated, and seemingly uninterested in his work. She tried everything: warnings, incentives, feedback. Nothing changed. One day she pulled him aside, and instead of lecturing him, she simply asked, "What's going on in your life right now?" And then she shut up. He broke down crying. His wife had been diagnosed with cancer. He was up every night with a sick child. He was drowning in fear and stress and couldn't bring himself to talk about it. That one moment of empathy transformed their entire relationship. He began showing up. Not just on time, but fully present. Because someone finally saw the pain behind his performance. She didn't excuse it, but she understood it. And in that understanding, he found strength again. Empathy changes everything. It turns arguments into dialogue. It turns coworkers into collaborators. It turns strangers into allies. But most importantly, it turns us into better versions of ourselves. It stretches us. It matures us. It invites us to slow down and say, "Wait a minute, there's more going on here than what I can see." And that insight is where real leadership begins. Imagine a world where people led with empathy, where doctors didn't just treat symptoms but asked about stories, where teachers didn't just discipline, but inquired about a child's home life, where politicians didn't just speak for their base, but listened to voices they didn't yet understand. That world is possible, but only if we start showing up with a different posture. A posture of humility. A posture of curiosity. A posture that says, even if I don't agree with you, I will try to understand you. I once spoke with a father who had been estranged from his son for nearly a decade. Every conversation ended in a shouting match. They disagreed on everything: politics, religion, career choices. Finally, the father did something different. He sat his son down and said, "I don't need you to change. I just want to understand how you got to where you are." His son cried. They talked for hours, not because they found agreement, but because they found empathy. That was the beginning of healing. The wounds didn't disappear overnight, but for the first time in years, they felt like they were on the same side. Not because their views changed, but because their hearts opened. That's what empathy does. It doesn't always solve the problem, but it shifts the posture of the relationship. It changes the climate of the conversation. It creates space for humanity to breathe again. And we all need that. We are all carrying something invisible. Pain, pressure, fear. Empathy is the invitation to say, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'm here. I see you. So here's your challenge. The next time someone irritates you, disagrees with you, or disappoints you, pause. Don't react. Get curious. Ask yourself, what might they be going through that I can't see? And if you're brave enough, ask them directly. Not to fix them. Not to change them, but to understand them. And then just listen. Hold the silence. Hold the space. Let your heart soften. Because empathy isn't about being right. It's about being real. And when we show up with real empathy, we don't just hear people. We heal them. And maybe, just maybe, we heal ourselves too. One of the greatest tragedies in human relationships is the failure to recognize what people are really trying to say. We often hear words, but we miss meaning. We hear tone, but we miss truth. That happens because most of us haven't learned to listen beneath the surface. We take words at face value without asking what's going on behind them. But the real message, the true message, is almost always beneath the words. It's in the emotion, in the silence between sentences, in the facial expressions, in the body language, and the subtle shifts of voice. To understand someone, you have to listen beyond what's spoken. You have to learn to read the heart, not just hear the sound. A person might say, "I'm fine," when they're breaking inside. A child might act out in school not because they're defiant, but because they're hurting. A colleague might grow quiet in meetings, not because they lack ideas, but because they've stopped feeling safe enough to share. If we only listen to the literal message, we'll miss the emotional truth. And that's why the fourth key to seeking first to understand is learning to listen between the lines. The real story is almost always hidden underneath the obvious one. I met a leader in a nonprofit who was known for turning around struggling teams. When I asked her what made her different, she said, "I listen for what people are not saying." She explained how she trained herself to spot what's beneath the words, the hesitation before a sentence, the energy behind a complaint, the emotional charge in an offhand comment. When someone lashes out at a teammate, she told me, I don't just correct the behavior. I ask, where's that coming from? 9 times out of 10, it's not about the meeting. It's about something much deeper. That's not just good leadership. That's wisdom. And it takes practice. But once you develop that kind of empathy radar, you begin to see people with new eyes. A father once told me how his teenage daughter had become distant. She locked herself in her room, barely spoke at dinner, and always responded with one-word answers. He tried talking, reasoning, even grounding her, but nothing worked. One day, out of frustration, he yelled, "Why don't you talk to me anymore?" And for the first time in months, she screamed back, "Because you don't actually listen. You just wait for me to finish so you can tell me what to do." That moment broke him and woke him up. From then on, he stopped lecturing and started listening. He didn't try to interpret her every word. He just showed up consistently, silently, until she began to trust him again. And one night, sitting in the car after a late soccer practice, she finally said, "I'm scared, Dad. Everything feels so heavy." That was the breakthrough. But it didn't come through advice. It came through presence. It came through the courage to wait, to listen deeply, and to understand what she couldn't say until she felt safe. So many of us want to be understood, but we don't realize that understanding others is the first step. And understanding others doesn't just mean listening to words. It means watching body language, noticing patterns, and being emotionally present enough to ask, what's really going on here? That's the difference between transactional communication and transformational connection. In transactions, we exchange information. In transformation, we exchange trust. You see, trust is built not when people agree with you, but when they feel you've truly heard them. And to do that, you have to develop what I call compassionate curiosity. Not interrogation, not cross-examination, but a genuine desire to understand someone's experience. Even if you don't share it, ask questions like, what was that like for you? How did that affect you? What's the hardest part about that? These are the questions that invite honesty, vulnerability, and depth. And when people feel safe enough to go there, the connection becomes real. So here's the challenge this week. Take one conversation deeper than usual. The next time someone vents, don't just nod or jump in with your own story. Pause. Ask what they mean. Reflect what you're sensing, and be brave enough to ask what's behind the emotion. Listen not just to the words, but to the feelings, to the energy, to the silence, because that's where truth lies. And when you find that space of true understanding, you won't just be communicating. You'll be connecting. You'll be healing. You'll be leading. Because when you listen between the lines, you give people the rarest gift of all. You give them the experience of being fully seen. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Fast conversations, fast decisions, fast results. We text instead of talk. We skim instead of read. We nod instead of understand. And in all that hurry, we've lost the art of presence. We've forgotten how powerful it is to slow down and give someone our full, undivided attention. Real presence says, you are important. This moment matters. I'm not rushing through you to get to something else. And that kind of presence is rare. But when you offer it, it's unforgettable. It's healing. It's transformative. Think about the last time you truly felt present with someone, or someone felt present with you. Time probably seemed to slow down. There was no pressure, no performance, no pretense, just presence. The truth is, you can't understand someone deeply if you're distracted. You can't read between the lines if your attention is scattered. You can't connect on a soul level if your mind is already planning the next meeting or checking your phone under the table. Presence is the doorway to empathy. It's the foundation of understanding. Without it, everything else is surface level. I once watched a CEO hold a town hall meeting with hundreds of employees. But what struck me wasn't the meeting itself. It was what happened afterward. One by one, employees lined up to ask personal questions or share concerns. And that CEO, instead of rushing through, gave every single person 5 full minutes of uninterrupted eye contact and attention. No checking the time. No looking over shoulders. No shortcuts. I stood there in awe, watching person after person walk away from that interaction visibly moved. Some even emotional. It wasn't because the CEO said anything magical. It was because they felt seen. They felt respected. That's the power of presence. It elevates people. But presence requires discipline. It demands that we resist the urge to multitask, to dominate, to control the direction of the conversation. Presence says, this moment is not about me. It's about you. And that is hard, especially in a world that rewards constant output and performance. But here's the paradox. When you slow down enough to be present with someone, you actually accelerate trust, collaboration, and impact. In other words, when you give more of yourself in the moment, you get far more back in the long run. There was a young woman I met at a leadership seminar who shared a powerful story. Her father was a busy executive, always on calls, always traveling, always chasing the next opportunity. She said, I don't remember much about what he bought me growing up, but I remember one Saturday morning when I woke up early, and he was sitting at the kitchen table, just waiting for me. No phone, no agenda, just waiting. He asked how I was doing, and he really meant it. We sat and talked for 2 hours. That was 20 years ago. I've never forgotten it. One moment of presence can become a lifelong memory. One conversation, fully seen and heard, can become an anchor in someone's soul. And it's not just about families or friendships. This applies in the boardroom, the classroom, the team meeting, the interview, the client pitch. Presence builds credibility. It builds loyalty. It sets the tone. People can feel when you're really with them. They can also feel when you're not. They may not call it out, but they'll remember. They'll feel the disconnection. They'll remember the glance at the watch, the half-hearted nod, the phone buzz you checked mid-sentence. And it chips away at trust, bit by bit. But when you show up fully, it's magnetic. It's inspiring. It makes people lean in and say, this person sees me. I matter here. So how do we cultivate that kind of presence? First, we have to slow down. Breathe, let go of the need to fix or perform. Second, we need to listen with our whole selves, eyes, ears, heart. And third, we need to embrace silence. Not every gap in a conversation needs to be filled. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, just being fully there with someone as they sort through their own thoughts. So here's your challenge. In your next conversation, turn off distractions. Close the laptop. Silence your phone. Make eye contact. Listen not just for words, but for meaning. And when you're tempted to rush or solve or shift the spotlight back to yourself, pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself this moment matters. This person matters. Be fully here. Because when you offer your presence, you're not just giving attention. You're giving dignity. You're giving love. And that, more than anything, is what people will remember. So often in life, we assume that the loudest voice is the most powerful. We believe that the person who speaks first, who argues best, who dominates the conversation, is the one who holds the influence. But that's a lie. Influence doesn't come from noise. It comes from understanding. Real influence begins not when you speak, but when you listen so deeply, so sincerely, that the other person begins to trust you with their truth. That trust is sacred. And when you earn it, people begin to open up, to lean in, to invite you into the conversation in a new way. That's when your words begin to carry weight. Not because they're loud, but because they're rooted in connection. Most people don't want your opinion. They want your understanding. They want to know that before you offer your perspective, you've taken the time to truly grasp theirs. That's what builds bridges. That's what ends arguments. That's what brings people together. And once someone knows that you're genuinely trying to understand them, they become far more open to hearing what you have to say. In fact, they often invite it. They ask for it. Because now you're not just another voice competing for airtime. You're a trusted presence. Someone who sees them. Let me tell you about a mentor of mine who changed the way I communicate forever. He was a man of few words, but every word he spoke seemed to land with impact. I once asked him, "How do you always know the right thing to say?" And he smiled and said, "I listen until I no longer feel the need to be right." That line hit me hard. Most of us listen with an internal agenda. We're crafting our reply while the other person is still talking. We're waiting for a pause so we can jump in and prove our point. But when you truly seek to understand first, your response becomes clearer, calmer, and often more transformative. You're not reacting. You're responding from a place of connection. I worked with a team leader who was having a major conflict with one of her senior staff members. They just couldn't see eye to eye. Every meeting was tense. Every email exchange felt like a battle. So I coached her through a new approach. I said, "Go into your next one. On one meeting with one goal, don't try to be understood. Just try to understand." So she did. For 45 minutes, she listened. She asked questions. She reflected back what she heard. And for the first time, her staff member broke down and said, "I've been feeling invisible for months, like nothing I say matters." That conversation changed everything. Not because she convinced him of anything, but because she finally understood him. And once that connection was rebuilt, the work could begin again. With respect, with collaboration, and with trust. When you speak after understanding, you speak with more precision. You speak to the real issue, not just the surface complaint. You address what matters most. That kind of communication doesn't just inform, it transforms. People don't just nod and move on. They remember it, they feel it, and they change because of it. Why? Because they know you've seen them. And that's the greatest gift you can offer another person, the feeling of being known. But you can't fake this. People can tell when you're just waiting your turn. They can tell when your listening is shallow. They can tell when your questions are designed to steer the conversation in your favor. True understanding comes from humility. It comes from the courage to say, "Help me see what you see. Help me feel what you feel. Help me understand before I assume, before I advise, before I speak." That posture of curiosity, of care, of restraint builds influence in a way no title or argument ever could. So here's your challenge in your next conversation. especially one that matters. Try holding your tongue just a little longer. Don't rush to speak. Don't jump to fix. Just listen. Ask one more question. Reflect what you hear. Make sure the other person feels completely heard before you offer your view. And when you do speak, speak not to prove, but to connect. Not to dominate, but to build. That's what it means to seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's the path to influence that lasts. That's the kind of voice that changes lives. Not because it's loud, but because it's earned. When we talk about communication, we often think in terms of words, what we say, how we say it, when we say it. But the final and perhaps most powerful key to seeking first to understand, then to be understood is not just about what you say. It's about who you are when you say it. Your character, your intent, your emotional presence. These are the silent messengers that speak louder than your voice ever could. Because before people listen to your message, they listen to your spirit. They listen to your authenticity. They listen to the quiet echo of your character behind every sentence. And if there's a disconnect between your words and your intentions, people feel it. Think about someone in your life who truly influenced you. Not someone who simply gave advice, but someone who left a mark on your soul. Chances are, it wasn't just what they said. It was how they made you feel. It was the safety they offered, the respect they radiated, the love they carried into the room. That's the essence of what I call emotional credibility. People don't just trust your words. They trust your heart. And if your words are not aligned with your heart, they will always fall flat, no matter how eloquent or intelligent they sound. I remember a high school teacher who completely changed the trajectory of a student's life. This student was on the verge of dropping out. Angry, bitter, closed off. Most teachers had written him off. But this one teacher didn't just try to fix his behavior. She tried to understand his pain. She stayed after class, asked questions, listened for hours. She even visited his home. She didn't come with solutions, she came with presence. Eventually, the student began to open up. He wasn't just acting out. He was trying to survive in a home filled with addiction and chaos. And what changed him wasn't a speech. It was a human being who saw him, believed in him, and walked beside him. That teacher didn't just communicate, she connected. And because of who she was, her words had weight. That student went on to graduate and later became a youth counselor himself. When people feel you genuinely care about them, they let down their defenses. They become open to influence. They may not agree with you, but they'll hear you out. Because you've shown them that your intent isn't to overpower, it's to connect. That's the real goal of seeking to be understood. Not to win arguments, not to gain control, but to create mutual respect, to open doors, to build something lasting. But you can't fake that kind of intention. It has to come from deep within. It means checking your ego at the door. It means examining your motives before you speak. Are you speaking to understand or to impress? Are you trying to connect or to convince? Are you entering the conversation with humility or with a need to dominate? These questions matter. Because if your words are clever but your spirit is proud, your message won't land. But if your words are simple and your heart is open, they'll carry the power to transform. A business leader once told me his secret to winning over skeptical clients. He said, "Before I ever try to sell anything, I ask myself, am I genuinely interested in this person's success or just my own? If it's just about me, I pause. Because if I don't care about them, they'll know it." That kind of self-awareness takes courage. But it's the difference between manipulation and influence, between performance and presence. So how do you cultivate this alignment between who you are and what you say? It starts with daily integrity, with doing the inner work, with asking hard questions of yourself. Do I walk my talk? Do I treat people with the respect I expect? Do I live out the same values I preach? Because when you do, your words carry credibility. They carry life. People may not always agree with you, but they'll trust you. And that trust opens doors no argument ever could. So here's your final challenge. Become the kind of person whose very presence speaks louder than words. Before you step into a tough conversation, ask yourself, what am I bringing into this moment? Love or fear, ego or empathy, pride or purpose? Let your words be an extension of your values, not a replacement for them. Because when who you are is aligned with what you say, your voice becomes more than sound. It becomes influence. It becomes light. It becomes something that others will carry with them, long after the words themselves have faded. And that, in the end, is what it truly means to be understood.